What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today, we'll be welcoming Vanity, who is the in-game leader of Cloud9 Blue. And they have LCQ right around the corner, so he just touched down in LA to begin the bootcamp for that. So we wish him the best of luck, of course, with that. But this was a really great conversation. It's an hour and 40 minutes, jam-packed with loads of different stuff to do with him as a player, his career, VALORANT, being a leader, being a captain, analyzing the game, strategy, tactics, preparing for teams, like understanding the defaults, habituation. Just like there's so many different areas that we touch on. It's a really great conversation. So, with all that said, here's Vanity. All right, Vanity, what is up? Thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. And you've just been traveling. You just arrived in LA today. So, I presume starting the boot camp, we're just coming up to LCQ. So you're getting prepared, I presume.
Yeah, we flew in a few days ago, but we flew in Saturday. We didn't play Sunday, and then we've played scrims every day since. I don't really remember what day we're at, to be honest. It all kind of blends together.
I mean, maybe this is like a great place to actually start because it's so topical. It's right on top of us. LCQ's around the corner.
Yeah.
Kind of a cutthroat competition. And for those people, I guess, sort of not following the Cloud9 story at least, and your story, of course, you came from version 1. You had a great run in Iceland. You eventually switched over to Cloud9. And Cloud9 actually for Iceland, they should probably have qualified. They I think ended up losing to Sentinels very narrowly after
and then we beat them
13-0 map, and then exactly so and then losing to you were on version 1 beating Cloud9. It's kind of messes up my head a little bit, but yeah, so Cloud9 didn't quite make it, and that seems like after a long time of not getting great results that would be the moment for Cloud9, but they kind of just fell off a cliff after that. But then you end up coming around. So firstly, with all of that kind of context, with version 1 and now being on Cloud9, now being the IGL, now having been with the team for roughly, I think, just over a month or so, like playing matches.
About a month. I think it was like around the beginning of August.
So how does it look? Going into it's super cutthroat. It's gonna be tough, but do you guys feel ready?
Yeah, I definitely think we're prepared. I mean, things like I came into the team not really knowing who we were going to use. Like, I thought I wanted to use Mitch more, and we tried both people. We swapped roles a little bit for the most part. And then after playing like with people, I was like, okay, I think this is how we should do it. And like, we haven't really had any objections since. Like, most of like what I think is like how we should play is how we've like done like the rules and all of that. And I think it's worked pretty well. We've been having pretty good practice. I mean, it's just practice and you need to translate it, but I have complete faith in our team that we're going to be able to translate it.
And it feels like with VALORANT, there's like always things that are changing, things that you can add tactically, strategically, like compositions if you want to go a bit bigger. But, you're at the point now where again, LCQ is a couple of weeks out. What do you think is, like, when do you get to a point in your practice and preparation where it's like everything is kind of set and locked, and then you're just kind of getting comfortable in that and not in the place of maybe swapping things around or kind of cementing new things and trying and adding new things to your playbook? Is that kind of a way that you might look at practice when you're coming up to a big tournament like this? Or how do you like to approach it? How is Cloud9 approaching, preparing for this tournament?
Yeah, on the teams that I've always been on, I kind of like, I don't like go into like structure it like this. I guess it's just kind of like how it ends up happening. It's how I like want to practice, but I've never like, X amount of weeks out, we're going to stop like implementing new things and we're just going to practice on what we're good at and like double down like on what we're good at and try to refine our weaknesses a little bit. Like, it's not like a certain amount of time. It's just like when I think like we're ready. But I would say about 2-ish weeks roughly is like when I think I try to switch from like, okay, we're learning and like improving and maybe even changing comps here and there, but like closer to the event, I think it's pretty important to try to nail down what you're good at, because like you can be so good at like one area and it's not like a bad thing to have weak areas, right? But like if you were like continuously improve in like the area that you're good at, obviously that'll lead to some success, like whether it's consistent or not. I think it's a lot easier to build yourself up when you have like something to fall back on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just think it's like a particularly interesting point in a sense, because we don't have a lot of events in like we did have had in CS, like events in general, lots of third party TOs coming in. So there's always like big events going on. And in VALORANT, I feel like it's just such a different look. And it's easy to forget sometimes that like there is kind of a way that you would want to ideally approach preparing for a tournament. And I think it's kind of interesting because a lot of teams, when they're playing like qualifiers or competitive matches and so on, a lot of them are kind of having to do both at once, trying to be ready for competition, but at the same time, maybe it's a newer roster, the meta's just changed. Like I feel like that's such a tough struggle that teams surely have to go through to kind of figure out how can we be as most competition ready whilst at the same time getting better.
I definitely think it's like hard to balance. Definitely it was like a little more difficult on version 1 because I don't think we had as many people that were flexible within like their roles. Like I think me and Zelsis were probably the most flexible in our team, like regarding like playing agents outside of our normal roles. I guess not like the few like the duelist or whatever, but I think just like comfortability on the other agents. I think me and him were probably like the two most comfortable. But I think on this team we have 5 people. Like I don't think there's a single person on our team who couldn't like excel on another agent role, like if we were forced to switch for some odd reason, right? And I think that makes it a lot easier to play given like the like looseness, I guess. I don't know. It's like I don't think IGLing in this game is very similar to Counter-Strike in the regard that there's so much going on. There's so many variables in every map. Like, yeah, I can give you like a good idea. We can talk through everything, but it's like, what do you do when you just get like util spammed, right? It's like you need to be able to like think on the fly for yourself and like make the right play. But I think like VOD reviewing in this game is a lot more important than it was in Counter-Strike because I think I mean, obviously this game's been what, like 2 years? Not even 2 years, like a year and a half roughly.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's like a little over a year and a half or
something.
something. I think the beta came out in like April or something during Flashpoint last year. So I think like obviously the game is going to keep evolving, and it's already evolved a lot. Like within like the 10 months I've been competing in it, and I think Riot's doing a good job. I don't think there's been too many like broken things that have lasted very long. I think they're doing a good job at shifting metas. Like I think there's been like 2 or 3 like really apparent metas since I switched. I think I do think having like the flexibility within people on the roster though is pretty important with how ever evolving the metas seem to be getting.
Yeah, that's, you know what, like you're right. I just when you mentioned how many meta shifts there have been, of course I think when you're in Valorant you kind of take it for granted at this point that this is kind of how the game works. If you've been there from the beginning, every 3 months there's going to be a pretty big shift. But then I was thinking, like, just trying to like name them in my head, and it's kind of crazy. I actually feel like this could be like a really great YouTube series that someone should make, which is just about like revisiting some of the metas and some of the storylines and the kind of the way certain parts of Valorant history kind of crystallize around certain metas and people's ability to abuse them. Like, for example, let's take, FaZe, for example, and I think during the Stinger meta, like that meta, they are really, the team that you think about.
I think it fit them pretty well just because like obviously the gun was really, really strong, but it's like when they can put as much pressure on other teams and then like, because they're like the only team who is comfortable playing at the pace that they play at. Like a good comparison would be like Fury and Counter-Strike. Like there's not very many teams who like have people who are committed to that like playstyle, like the super aggressive thing. And I think having like a weapon that was that strong at that price point like enabled that, because obviously you can buy a lot more frequently and you can do like fast things. Like even if they're not super set, but like you can just keep like, when you're getting pressured in all 5 parts of the map, it's not always like the easiest thing to deal with. And I think that they showed that during like when they were having their really good run in the beginning of this year.
Yeah, and we might bring up FaZe again a little bit later because they did add a new coach, which I think is interesting. And JDM, I think is very interesting. We'll just leave it at that for the moment. But
I don't.
So you're talking about the metas and everything, and how different it is. The game is compared with CS, and the kind of things that demands of players is different demands there as well. I've grown really accustomed, as I imagine you have too, to the pacing of Valorant. It feels like there's never wasted time. Every piece of util is significant. Every moment is significant, and it's not that Counter-Strike isn't significant, but it just feels like it's just much more in Valorant. It's just much more easy to point out. Honestly, CS has so many subtle things.
I think it's a lot harder to. I think it's a lot easier to understand like when a round turns on its head in Valorant from like a spectator point of view versus like in Counter-Strike. Like you're not gonna note it. Like I think like something that is like pretty impactful, right? Like in CS, everyone has smokes. in Valorant, if you get like you're playing defense, your Jet upper kills like the Astra, Omen, Viper, whatever early on, it just makes the round so much different. There's so many different variables that go into it after that point because like not everyone has like the same like capabilities, and I think that's pretty under like represented, I guess, like within like the casters and stuff. Like I don't think it's pointed out very much, like just how much like you'll notice like how different teams play once they lose like an agent. Like it doesn't have to be like an Astra, but like a Sova or a Jet, right? It just changes like rounds completely. And I think you have to consider a lot more variables. It's like even with like the comp, like the people don't play the same comps on every map, so it's like what works against like certain styles isn't going to work against another. Obviously that also happens in Counter-Strike, but there's like it's even deeper than that because like not every like some teams like to run like double controllers on Icebox or Breeze, for example, where like a lot, like I'd say 80% of teams only run one. And I think like the importance of the controller agents on those maps isn't as significant when you have two of them, obviously, because you have more smokes.
Yeah, it's I think you're totally right about the, like you kind of did a shout to the casting as well specifically. It's just like from a storytelling point of view, it's such a huge deal. I know that's something that I think this is the reason why people like Sean's casting in particular so much, because he's able to like speak very well to these small tactical things that have huge repercussions and kind of like it's like a this or that kind of if statement, like set that up for the viewer, which allows you to like really get engaged even if you have no knowledge. And I mean there are some metas that are more obvious than others with regards to this, like for example the Omen meta, with how strong the paranoias were and everyone was running Omen on basically every map. As like a caster, you're like, if you understand like some of the things that are going on in the pro scene, you can or just if you're just a good analyst, you can see that teams will be trying to bait out specific points of utility, and then the entire round comes down to the fact that maybe you successfully got rid of that paranoia, and that's just what the story needs to be about. So if you miss that, you've actually missed the entire point of that round. So it's like I think that happens a lot, just as all of all commentate all of us get better.
I think a lot of that comes down to though is like the people. A lot of the casters in Valorant haven't been casting FPS games at like a super high level for a really long time. Like I think a large, like I would say maybe the ones that do like all the big Riot events, but I think like people tend to point those kind of things out on like the smaller tournaments. But it's like that's what these are for, guys. It's like they need to get the experience. Like they have like all of the energy and all of that, but it's like they're missing things that only come with time. Like you just don't completely understand it just because you've been doing it for like a year, right? Where Sean has been. I mean, he competed professionally for years and been casting for on and off for a relatively long time now at this point.
Yeah, it's funny actually. The first time I ever casted with Sean was at like, I don't even know if you were playing CS at this point, or at least not on a pro team, but like it was the MLG X Games in Aspen, like 2016.
No.
Yeah,
yeah. I think that was still when I was quitting every other week or something. I was in like ESCA intermediate or something.
Awesome, yeah, yeah. That was I think like both mine and Sadicus like breakout event as like talent. That was like the first big events that we did. But yeah, it's crazy. Like for us too, we have so much experience that we can take for granted, and it's like I've been asked a few times, what with commentary, like what do you need, what's something that play-by-play commentator needs to do, and I always say like you need to like really learn how to study the game, because even though you're a play-by-play commentator, you need to be able to, you don't have to know everything about Valorant and be an analyst at the same time, but you have to know how an analyst thinks. And then what points of the round are like important for them to give you the information you need to tell the story. Like, and you can't do that if you don't see the game properly. So it's in CS, it took us a long time, honestly, to get good at commentary. I think that's something that people do forget too, is it did take probably like 2 or 3 years till it started to get quite good.
I think like it became when it became like a legitimate like career path, I guess, is when it became a lot more professional, right? Because people could actually like commit a lot of time to it, rather than like if you watch like the early CS:GO majors, it was probably pretty abysmal too, because people weren't doing it like completely like devoting their life to this like path. So it's like, of course, it's not going to be as good, but it's like the longer things go on, it should get better.
Definitely, yeah. And I think the other thing too is that like in CS, kind of like you said before, at least like the basic variables are pretty predictable. So the fundamentals are kind of easy. You get more repetitions really of the fundamentals. So it's easier to learn in that sense. But Valorant's kind of challenging too, because like we said, it's like a lot faster. Everything is important. And unless
Yeah.
you've done the work ahead of time, you just won't be able to work that stuff out really very well on the fly. You'll see patterns over time, but it's going to be less prevalence of patterns because methods change so constantly. You actually need to be able to understand the game and have a good way to approach thinking about the game, which I can segue us into the fact that you're the IGL for Cloud9, and generally people who take that kind of a role are, tend to be people that like to be pretty analytical, study the game. You're in a pro team, so you're working with a coach, an analyst, presumably. So in terms of like your position as an IGL, do you feel like this is how you get the most out of yourself in the game? Why did you decide to go down this route, especially in a professional capacity?
I think I kind of always like had an idea of how I wanted to play the game, but I didn't really like. I don't know. I didn't like pursue Counter-Strike super consistently throughout like my early. I didn't even want to call it a career because I really wasn't playing like that much. Like I would just play Pugs and like Rank G and all of that. But like when I decided to start taking more seriously after I graduated high school, I was like, I joined a guerrilla gang with like Cam, OC Ryan, and Ben Leet. We changed rosters a little bit here and there, but like I think I've always been kind of like confident in my in myself, and I think that's pretty important in IGL. I also realized like I probably wasn't consistent enough to be like a star player, so like this is probably the path that I should end up taking. And then I think I've developed a lot compared to like the early days because I've only been doing it about 3 years now, roughly. I think because around 3 years. I think 2018 is when because I was initially an opper because I was like Kusta's biggest fan in the entire world. But yeah, no, I think I didn't start IGLing until I was an MDL in Counter-Strike, Premier, MDL, whatever it's called. But I think it definitely gravitated towards me more so than anything because like the team that I was on, our IGL wasn't like completely like, I guess we all didn't like, completely believe in him because like I think we played like a playoff match and he was like stumbling over his words, and then we all kind of got like frustrated because it was like a pro league promotion season or something. And after that I decided to take it over because we had like a team talk, and ever since then I've been doing it on every team I've been on. I mean, I guess I kind of took a break on Chaos, but like not really. It was pretty split. I think at the very beginning I did take a step back when we had Smuya. I think that was like probably, he wasn't there very long because I joined in January. He left in like the beginning of whenever COVID started, so he was there probably 2.5, 3 months. I think that's probably like the least like voice I've had in a team. Like I still had a voice, it just wasn't as like relevant as it has been in the rest of my teams. But pretty much after Smuya left, me and Steel were pretty 50-50 on the IGLing, I think. So yeah, I think it's definitely, I think I'm pretty good at like remembering things, and like I like watching, like I watch like every pro VALORANT match, like I watch like pretty much everything in Berlin, like even the teams like that aren't like the best regions yet. I think you can still learn some stuff from these players. Like they have some cool like little tricks that they do, and I think we definitely took some things from like the smaller, like I think what are they called, wildcard regions, I believe. I think we took some things from them and implemented in our game, and hopefully we could make use of them at the LCQ.
That sounds like a really smart choice, just because it's like that idea of, even if it's like in this game, you can be super creative, and there has to be gold just all over the place, even if it's, as you say, like with teams
even
that
in
haven't done a great job.
These people complain about like playing ranked. It's like, dude, you learn so much in ranked, even though like if you look for it, you'll learn a lot in ranked. It's not like enjoyable most of the time, but you can definitely pick up on a lot of things in ranked, even if it's like not the most productive like use of your time. I do think it's pretty beneficial, and I think you pick up on a lot of things if you're like looking out for them and not just like mindlessly playing, of course.
Which is almost a necessity, playing ranked, so you don't get your life just destroyed by the toxicity. But so so you have all this experience, doing the IGL role. You've IGL'd with on a team with Steel, and sort of seen his style of it as well. So I imagine you can speak to that a little bit. What do you think of sort of different styles of IGLs, how you settled with your approach, and how you would describe your approach?
I think there's like a few like styles, obviously. I think like you have IGLs that aren't as I think more important than like being like good like at strats and things like that. It's like being like a leader of men, right? Like even if I don't believe in what I'm saying, sometimes I just have to say it like I sound like I believe it, so people will do it confidently and not like get second guess themselves. I think that's probably like the most important aspect of IGLing, in my opinion, at least. Like you can develop all the strats you want, but if you don't sound like you're sure of what you want to do, then why would people like listen to you, right? I think that's something I don't really know. I learned that from like one of this. I read like a decent amount of sports psych books and like books like of that genre. And I think that's one of the things that I picked up on. It's like you don't need to completely believe in yourself, but like if you're like in like a leadership position, you need to sound like you do. And I think that's something that I'm pretty good at now. Obviously, you can't do it all the time, but I think a large majority of the time that's probably like my biggest positive trait as an IGL. I think Josh is not so much of a leader of men as he is like a great tactician. I think I would compare like Josh more so to like a Sean Garris, where they'll come up with like insane strats, like all of this, but maybe they're not so confident in like their own abilities and stuff like that.
Interesting.
I think,
oh, go ahead.
What were you gonna say?
I was going to ask you as a kind of lead on from that, who do you think is to you the most impressive IGL, given all the kind of factors that you're mentioning, and that is some people are good at certain things and maybe not others, but is there somebody that you think is kind of the complete package that's out there in Valorant or CS?
In Valorant? I don't think so in Valorant, not yet at least. Like obviously I haven't played against like the European IGLs very much, apart from like some scrims. I mean obviously in Counter-Strike like Glaive, he's probably the best of all time. I don't really think there's much of a comparison for anyone else. I mean, if you are comparing them, I think it's kind of like a stretch, because I think like maybe you could say like Kerrigan or something, because he's done it with so many different rosters, but like there's like the success and like what Glaive did for Astralis is probably unmatched at this point in CS:GO, at least. Maybe in like prior Counter-Strike games it was different, but I think as of now, yeah, definitely Glaive would be like the pinnacle of IGLing and like the leadership things. I mean, obviously I've never played with him or like listen to the comps, but when like the little comp snippets that they release, it seems like he has a really good idea of what he wants to do, and they all like bought into like the system.
So kind of speaking of, again, like just this is it's interesting to talk about this, just because I don't think there's a lot of people discussing like what it takes to really do anything at the high level, and there's just so much nuance to basically every single role, even if it sounds more mundane. I think there is just at the top level there is so much to go through, and with this, you're talking about sort of you consume a lot of, like, firstly, you place a huge emphasis on the leadership aspect, which is definitely huge, and I think also underlooked pretty massively what that can do.
I think that's like the biggest thing. I think North American Valorant is kind of following the same thing that NACS had happened, where it's just like there aren't IGLs. Like maybe people want to call strats, but I think it's like completely different than like being an in-game leader and like being like a strat caller. Like yeah, I guess like obviously there is going to be overlap. Like IGLs typically will probably be calling the strats, but it's more important to like bring people together and like at the highest level, because everyone is good, right? Like it's more important to like help people bring together and like make sure you're on the same page versus just being able to like recite strats off the top of your head, because I don't think that leads to consistent success.
Yeah, and I mean that aspect of sort of like, because I guess people might take different things from the word IGL in-game leader. Okay, well that follows that he is leading in the game, calling the plays, blah blah blah. But also you're talking about like what some people might consider like the element of being a captain of a team, the leader of men, as you said.
I think that's I guess I think that's probably the best way to describe it, is like there's people that'll like be in-game leaders but not captains of like a team, and I think you're kind of seeing that in the North American scene, which kind of disheartening, because like surely we figured this out at some point, guys. Like just do it. just figure it out, man. Just it'll help you a lot. You'll probably get more success. Like even if you're not completely like great at it at first, you probably weren't very good at Valorant at first. So it's like, why not try to develop something that'll help you understand the game at a deeper level?
Yeah, this is I've definitely over the years, I've been both of these two things myself, but I've noticed that generally people fall into, God, I hate generalized statements like this, and I'm probably going to regret this, but people fall into like one or two categories as players. Either you're the player that like wants to look for every edge, and you don't mind sparing any effort to do that, outside of the game as not just inside the game, or you're the kind of player that thinks you can solve everything by putting more hours into the game and you don't have to do anything outside. And that works for some players, and especially in a game like Valorant. I think, like you said, I think you get more out of grinding heavily, like with matchmaking.
I think comparing Counter-Strike and Valorant in that regard is, I think you get a lot more out of your hours, even if it's not as consistent like benefits from grinding ranked versus Counter-Strike. Like, I don't think you learned much in FPL, pugs, or anything of that nature. I think you learn a lot more from like watching demos, watching VODs, because Counter-Strike is a lot more like, you can play perfect Counter-Strike for the most part. Like, not 100%, because sometimes like Nico will just kill 4 of you, but for the most part you can account for a lot of things, and you can like get it down to like if you look at like the top teams in the world, like when they're at their peaks, it looks like they're playing like it's like a perfect science like formula, right? They have everything accounted for, nothing is like missing. But I think it's more beneficial in Valorant to like have like a balance, because I think just like how frequently the agents get released and like new maps, it's like I think if you're not putting in like the hours outside of your team, you're just not going to understand like the agent interactions. Like I think like a good example would be like Astra. Like no one, I guess a lot of the teams didn't really realize how strong she was, because people wouldn't like play her, but then like people start playing her, she realized, oh wow, she actually might be like the best agent in the game, when she had like the period during Reykjavik where she was like without a doubt the best agent in the game. But no one really realized it, because no one wanted to like spend the time like learning how to play the agent, because whatever that was, right? But if you see like the possibilities of like the synergy with the agents in like a ranked game, or like even just practice, but I think it's pretty important to like get the extra repetitions in ranked, because like why not? It's just extra things or extra time spent that's gonna benefit you in the long run. And I think like the more the agents get released, the maps get released, like it's important to be comfortable on like the newer ones, just in case they are good. Like even if it's not like ranked, obviously isn't like the most enjoyable amount like time, but it's definitely not as bad as some pros like to paint it out to be.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there's a lot to say on all of that. I think as a very quick thing on that last point, I think that goes into also sort of there's like this element I feel is important, which is this kind of like mental preparedness. It's kind of like you would for anything that you do, like something that you would do in the gym before you work out, you might warm up, right? And it's kind of like the whole point is like you're listening to music, you're warming up your muscles, and it's the same kind of thing, but in a mental sense. So you do, sure, like you do your hit your aim lab, your deathmatch, whatever, but also at the same time like trying to make sure that like keep some checks on yourself, that you're in the right mindset, because there's a lot of times when people play and they're kind of in that mindset where when bad things happen, they would just sort of immediately go to tilt. Or
it spirals like out of control too quickly, I think, is like the biggest thing that happens to a lot of players.
And also like no goals. Like, why are you actually playing? Because
it's just like mindlessly playing versus like 3 product. I think Elige is probably like the best about it that I've ever like listened to, or like the best that like that's ever spoke about it publicly. It's like going into like something with like a goal oriented mindset versus just queuing up and just playing to play, right? I think it's pretty important.
100% agree. Yeah, it's something that like, again, there's just so many small nuances to it. I think as people start to get, I mean, I talk about this kind of stuff a lot. So hopefully, just I'll be like one extra drop in the ocean in terms of just adding some more awareness around these ideas. But it's like when you think about just like how much focus you have in a day, it is like a finite resource. And so I think especially when you're younger, and I'm saying it like this because I didn't really have a sense of this as a player when I was younger, but as I started to get older, I started to notice that the more tired I got, my like focus would get worse. And I would realize that because as I paid more attention to what was happening in my performances, I could see that I was just making that feeling, like this is like a really easy sign, that feeling when you ask yourself, like, I don't know why I just did that thing. That you've like got to the point where you've lost your focus, you're too tired to play. And at that point you're getting bad reps. And just again, like think about it like going into the gym, if you have like a lot of bad repetitions on something, or you're like overtraining, the results are always going to be terrible for you. So it's like, I think when people start to really put that into perspective, and you can start to like maybe try to notice these things a little bit more, see what the signs are that I'm too tired, or like whatever it might be, I think you can start like using your time way more effectively, and then you have more fun in the game. I think at least.
I can agree with that.
So
versus like just mindlessly queuing like 14 hours of ranked a day. Just getting, like being like completely just mentally out of it the entire time. I think it's a lot better to play like 3 or 4, however many. Like every person is different, like regarding like the amount of time you can get that's productive from like a solo queue environment. But I think it's better to get like a productive like 4 hours than it is to have like a mindless 12 hours of playing.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's cool as well because you get to then this like opportunity cost, because that time that didn't go into all that extra playing and like tiring you out and getting more bad habits in there, you actually get to spend that time recovering or doing something that's like just good for your essence as a human being. I don't know what it is, like, you know, everyone, all the cool people are saying touch grass or whatever these days, but yeah, so it's super interesting. I actually had I mentioned this on the podcast with Mike's, that Ye was talking to me about some of the stuff, and we went into this huge conversation about what are all of the edges you can possibly gain, sort of like on a more holistic basis, like the stuff that's outside of the actual game to help your performance and to keep your energy levels in a consistent and a good place. Like psychologically speaking, like how do we kind of figure out how that element works to create consistency? So it's like really cool to hear you talking about those things as well. And you said that you've been reading some sports psychology books. Have you been reading anything interesting, or have you experienced any revelations recently that you want to share?
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't been reading as much lately. I think like the biggest, I don't know, like my favorite book that I've read regarding that was like the John Wooden one. I don't remember the exact title, but I don't remember exactly the title of the book. Winning Good. I don't remember exactly. It's like like setting up yourself to win in the long run is more important than just like winning like once, like a one-off, I guess, essentially. Like building the platform for success is more important than just getting there and falling off instantly. I don't remember the exact the score isn't the end result or something like that. I can't remember for sure.
Nice. But that sounds like a good title. So
something similar to that. Something similar to that. But it's like it's more important about like understanding how to get there and getting there more important than just getting there and then falling off instantly. Because I think people don't remember, for the most part, like teams that win like one event, right? Like you'll remember like Sentinels had like this insane run. Obviously they had like a tournament where they played pretty poorly here, but I think they know that they can compete at the top, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them back because they know how to get there. I think it's more important to understand that versus just like hoping you can get there, like get lucky, like win once and then just fall back into like irrelevancy. I think it's pretty important to try to build like the habits behind it versus just getting there.
Yeah, and I think that's such a again an underlooked point, because there's this really interesting difference. I remember like hearing Gary Kasparov talk about this a while ago, the chess champion, about this. There's this like fundamental difference between in competition as an athlete, you're either chasing to be the best, like chasing the person who is the best to be the best, or you are the best. And like those are two completely different mindsets and approaches, because to stay being the best, you'd have to have the ability to consistently innovate and create a new path for the game, the way the game is played at that level. Whereas if you're trying to chase the best, you get to see everything that they're doing and learn from what they're doing, copying what's successful, maybe trying to make your own innovations. But it's all about just dethroning that team or player once. And then once you've done that and you're the best, now you've got to figure out a completely new, different type of way of looking at being an elite level team or player. So that's like another interesting aspect, because like you say, we've seen this. Like loads of teams have come out there, they have like a honeymoon period, or they're in a good spot and then they win. But then a lot of them don't have the ability to do that switch to stay at the top. Yeah, and
the books was the score takes care of itself. That's what it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that.
Wrong author, but Bill Walsh. I read I read both of the books. I just mixed up the authors.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so let's go back into the captain IGL thing very quickly here, because this is another thing that I think is interesting. Like, it's really cool to share the things that you learn with the people around you, and if you look at like major sports teams, there is so much support and player development that's constantly happening and going on, and coaches of like incredible amounts of experience that that they have that they can pass down, and they've got so many different qualities because maybe they're older, they are really good leaders, they're good analysts, they understand people, they understand being a player, they've had the experiences, they've got credibility. a lot of these things I don't think we can say about a lot of the people that we have in esports, and also at the same time there's no standard, there's no expected standard to kind of adhere to, so everyone's kind of doing their own thing. So it's like the Wild West in that sense. And so you're in a place where you're kind of trying to learn everything in every edge, trying to understand how to be a great leader, but also through your development personally as a player, I imagine you'll also want to instill some of these things on your players. Because, for example, that example we just used about winning the tournament but not being able to sustain that consistency, a lot of that is the mental game and just the way that you approach being a player. So there must be a lot of spots where teams and players, they could do that, but they just don't have the right people leading them, or they don't have the right mentors or support to grow in that way. And they themselves, it'll take them maybe a couple of years to figure that out, but maybe that team could have done it if they had the right people teaching them. So are you trying to like instill these ideas? Like, do you see it, what do you see in terms of like what people are missing, what pro players are missing? Is this like a really commonly just missed element of being better?
I definitely think it's pretty infrequently like recognized by people. Like, I think people just think it's like, obviously it is a video game, and like being good at it isn't completely correlated to like what you do like mentally, but I think it helps being like mentally prepared and like showing up like on a consistent basis, because like people don't realize like how habitual humans are. So like people like will make plays in scrims and then they'll do the same thing in a match, and they're like confused as to why it doesn't work in matches. But it's like the people are just more aware, right? It's like, oh, I wouldn't do this in a match, but then you do the same thing, you lose your team the round. And then I think it's something that people think they can get away from, but I don't know if you can break human law. Congratulations, I guess. Like, people underestimate how like much of a creature of habit humans are. It's odd.
That's actually, again, another kind of sales pitch for goal-oriented training, because that allows you to kind of like just chunk everything down, so you do have you have like some sense of what's happening. Because otherwise, as you say, like you have no checks. There's no check and balance sheet. You've got no idea what you're actually doing with your time, and you're going to be instilling these habits that probably won't help you. And then this is also like, oh man, I mean, I experienced this as a player too. Like you hit this like mental barrier where it's like, I can't get better. I don't know why, and I didn't spend time correctly, so I have not got the skills to really solve my problem quickly.
There's not like a solid foundation to build upon, so you're kind of just trying to throw things at a wall and hope they stick.
It's really tough. Like, so are there any other things about like pro players in general that you think is lacking in terms of development that's worth talking about?
I don't think there's like that many things that really stand out. Like, I think people don't take their jobs seriously enough for the most part. Like, I think it's kind of disappointing how lazy people get when you get to play a video game for a living. I feel like that should be like enough motivation to like, get on, put in some effort. Like, he could be doing literally like anything else in the world, but you get to play a video game for your job, and you can't even like be bothered to like try to put your best foot forward for your teammates, like even not for yourself. Like, you're letting down other people. It's pretty disappointing to see like some of this happen.
So there's a couple things there as well. I love that you said this, because I think it's really easy to not mention this, but it is, I think, pretty apparent. We've seen stories around this kind of thing in like so many places, stuff that like comes out after like a player left, or like there's a twit longer somewhere, and or people can see other people's Steam accounts and you see where they're spending their time, and it's there's as the industry gets more professional over time, there'll certainly be more scruple on this. But also at the same time, I would expect teams would have higher standards, and they would have more. And this is where I'm kind of going with this now, is we have this situation in a lot of teams that the power doesn't necessarily exist in either in one of the right places, or two, it happens in such a way that the people that should be able to make the decisions or have the most decision-making power aren't doing that, or the people that don't have the information to make good decisions, making the calls on like roster moves, or like even as we're talking about here, like it should be the case that I would assume, like for me as a player, like I always felt really awful if it was pretty clear to me that I was putting in way more effort than everybody else. That's going to hurt morale. That's going to hurt generally the team's performance. So, like, do you feel like generally speaking, we don't get enough, like, speaking of checks and balances, that happening from the average esports org that runs the teams, and why is that?
I think it's hard. We were actually talking about this. Like, I went to a dinner with my coaches and my manager last night or 2 nights ago. We were talking about this. It's like, it's so hard in esports to find a GM and like a coaching staff who is actually like looking out for like the betterment of the team and isn't like, because I feel like what happened is people hire like their friends like to be like their coach or their GM, right? But I mean, obviously, like there needs to be like a mutual trust there, but it's hard for people to like fire your friends, right? So I think it's a really fine line, and I don't think very many people have found it. At least in the FPS genre, like I think there's probably some teams that have it. Like I think Fury would be a good example, like Gehi, um, Zonic on Astralis, of course, and but I don't think like there's very many people and like teams who have like the true team environment where like they have full faith in like their management. But that's for a good reason, honestly. Like I feel like a lot of esports rosters are pretty poorly managed for the most part, and I think it'll continue to get better. But I mean, as of now, I definitely can understand like where people come from, like regarding that like point of view, like where they're not completely sure what to do, so nothing happens.
Yeah, I've heard numerous stories from numerous teams, and I'm very shocked in 2021 that stuff is still run as poorly in a lot of cases as it is. Which again, it doesn't benefit anybody really.
I definitely think it's getting better than it used to be. Like 100%, it's definitely getting better. Probably not at the rate it should, but I mean, that's just gonna happen sometimes, right? Like, it's not everything is gonna go like as planned or like the ideal like improvement rate, but I think it's I think a lot of it though is hard because I think some of these older players get more chances because they've done more in the past versus like the people that are like newer to the professional scene that are like the ones putting in like incredible amounts of hours and like all the work, like watching the VODs and stuff, the best performers on the teams. So like these organizations, I think people overvalue experience a pretty decent amount, especially in like a newer game like this. Maybe in like Counter-Strike it was a little more important, but I think just like having people that are willing to put in the effort is a lot more important than the people that have been playing for like a really long time professionally, like that obviously aren't that fully invested into the game. It kind of feels unfair to their teammates.
Yeah, that's another really interesting area for sure because I can definitely see like in a game like Valorant where the competitive future isn't all too certain that
Yeah.
certain teams will lean towards, okay, this guy has a known brand. He's like already bringing across his own following,
Yeah.
and we can brand our team like that. Actually, that reminds me, the whole thing with Steel is kind of crazy because I actually felt like, regardless of like what you think of the results of that team, I think like from a branding point of view, I felt like they had such a great 5-man roster just because of the history and of the team, but also and the players. And it just seemed to like, I don't know, it felt like they really made 100 Thieves what 100 Thieves kind of feels like it is in Valorant.
I
But
agree.
now Steel's a key piece and he's gone. So what was your reaction to this? Are you shocked or happy or
I don't know if I can talk about this. I don't think I should talk about this.
Okay, that's totally fine. Well, my reaction was I was really shocked. So curious to see what happens with Steel in the future. As a quick side note, what we can do is we can talk about Steel just a little bit because I think he's one of the it's really interesting. Like for those that don't know, I mean, some people might understand that Steel was a part of the IBA Power group that received lifetime bans from Valve events in Counter-Strike Global Offensive back in 2015, 2016, a long time ago, 2016, I think. And he was trying to make it work in CS. Even still, the only player that really continued to keep.
It was the only one that kept like fully pushing, yeah.
And he
like
also
the rest of them kind of came back and tried, but there was nothing compared to Josh. No.
Yeah, you couldn't get rid of him. It's crazy, like it's actually really crazy because and that's significant because Josh is like an extremely competitive guy, and but at the same time he was continuing to put all this this immense amount of time and energy and passion into Counter-Strike. It's impossible for him to even think or try to achieve the achievement in that game as a competitor. Like the only thing you want to win, which is the major, like because he was banned from it. So it's crazy that he spent so much time still committed to the game. He didn't disappear from it at all for a minute, except for Valorant. And
when we were on Chaos, I don't even think he would have left if we didn't like tell him to leave.
Crazy.
Yeah, because like because we're pretty close friends, and I remember he's like, the only way that I'll leave is if you guys can get Marky or like someone that I think is good enough, and that was ended up being Marky, and I'm like, all right, Josh, we got Marky. We need you to go do what's better for yourself. And then it kind of took a little bit of pushing, but eventually we got him to realize that he should stop like delaying the inevitable, I guess, before he's too far behind. And then obviously everyone saw how that went. They had like an insane run. They won first strike. I mean, they just got third at Berlin, and then unlucky happens, unlucky circumstances.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Like the
Yeah,
results
he
were
was still
amazing.
committed to Counter Strike even when he ended up transitioning. Like he didn't. Like, and probably not as much as he was in the beginning of Chaos. Like he definitely knew he was going to switch to Valorant, and I think it kind of took like me pushing him to like, all right, Josh, just go do it. It's better for you. You're going to make way more money. You can compete in everything. Just go, just get it done. And I think, yeah, because we all were still pretty close friends. I think we went to dinner every few weeks because we still all lived there until the end of December in the same complex.
Oh, that's awesome, dude. I mean, the guy he brought and I don't know if he like really directly mentored anybody, but he brought up so many rosters and helped so many teams grow and individuals get better around him, and helped so many players along his pursuit of CS, even though he was shut out of the Valve events. Pretty remarkable. And then to come into Valorant, so like he's now, I think he feels like a pillar of the game in terms of the pro scene. Like he's such a well-known professional, such a long history. Like, how are you feeling about him as a player in this game? Because you mentioned that he's a tactician. This is a game where the tactics are constantly having to evolve. So it feels like no matter how old he gets, it feels like there should be a place for him.
Yeah, I definitely don't think he'll ever have an issue finding like a roster to play with. I mean, I've been talking to him. He's been talking to some teams. I don't know if I should say that, but I mean, it's pretty apparent, right? Like, there's no way people think this guy's not going to have interest. But yeah, it seems like he's still really motivated to compete. And I mean, I think his mechanics are just as good as they've ever been. I feel like people don't think he's good mechanically for some reason, and it's very weird. Like, this guy's probably got better aim than like half of the pros in NA, to be honest. He's just kind of dumb sometimes, but I think it's because he like overcompensates like to help his teammates, like to try to micromanage, which causes like lapse of judgment. But I mean, every IGL has that. But like people saying he doesn't have like good mechanics is just, yeah, I don't understand it.
Yeah, that's actually a great point too, because I remember when I was watching his stream in the early days of CS:GO, when you still consider him really just like a young professional player. I mean, because obviously at this point you get towards 30, everyone thinks you're ancient and washed up, but his mechanics were just like some of the absolute best in
he
NA.
has really good mechanics. I don't like people see because he doesn't have like the most insane stats. It's like, oh, he's so bad. It's like, dude, I don't think that's how it works, guys. That's not completely how it works. There's not much like there's definitely correlation in stats and mechanics, but it's not like 1-to-1.
Yeah, and it's gonna be interesting to see how that story plays out, because if like, he's obviously the hottest commodity on the market right now.
I think the biggest thing, like I think he'll make any team he joins better, simply because as long as he gets 4 people that'll like actually like listen to him and like fully commit to how he wants to play, I wouldn't be surprised to see them become one of the best teams in NA. I think he's one of the smartest people in North America, like regarding like calling and all of that. But he needs like people that completely like believe in him, and hopefully he can find something like that in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like he's going to be able to do so much. So I mean, as someone that also knows his story so intimately, like it's really satisfying for me whenever I see him succeed. Just knowing how many just being there like for years.
How much he cares, right? Like, I don't think there's very many people in esports that care as much as he cares.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just like pure passion. Like, I think a lot of people, like, it's still a job to them, but I feel like for him, it's just he does it because he loves it. Like, obviously, even in Counter-Strike, right? Like, this guy wasn't getting paid, but he was still like playing Counter-Strike as much as he could for a while, at least. Like, obviously, his income was FPL, like some of it, but it's like he did it because he loved the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and finally the rewards are coming through for him, and I mean, hopefully, he'll just get increasingly better deals for himself. So yeah, it's good to see that he's still alive in the game. We mentioned JDM joining the FaZe as a coach, and previously, and I think I read somewhere that he hasn't really played the game very much. I know he hasn't well, I assume he hasn't coached very much. Looking at his CS career. But do you have any other insight into JDM? Because I think for a lot of people, it's a bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. If you want to get a CS:GO coach and you sign JDM and not MCE, I mean, obviously I'm biased because I like him, but like MC coached the team to like people didn't think they would make top or they could make the major. They made the major. They did relatively well. Like they didn't do insanely well. As far I don't remember. I don't think they made top 8 or anything. But like he brought like an NA team that people didn't really think would make the major to a major. I mean, I'm obviously biased for sure because he was my coach for like a year, a little over a year. But I mean, I've always thought really highly of him like prior to playing with him. I think it's odd to pick up someone who's never coached. Like it's okay. Like I guess it makes sense because they want to get like the Counter Strike like fundamentals down. But I don't know if someone who has, I mean, unless he plays Valorant on like alt accounts or something, or like has been watching, I'd be surprised to see like fast results. Like I don't think he's the person that's going to completely turn FaZe around instantly, but maybe he's actually been paying attention and it could be good for them. But I think like if you're going for like a Counter Strike brain, like I think MC was made more sense, but maybe I mean obviously I think being personable with your coach is kind of important, and maybe they have some like prior connections to JDM. So I think I could see that, but I mean I don't know. Me and him never really got along, but I don't really have like bad blood against him. Like maybe he's changed, maybe he's gonna put in the work.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how it's gonna turn out.
Valorant's it's a reset button for everyone.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Fracture a little bit then as well, because we finally have a 7-map pool, which is going to make bans and everything, just that whole veto system is just a lot more convenient and easier. What do you think of the map?
The LCQ, sadly.
Yes.
But yeah, I like the map. I haven't played it much because we got told a few weeks ago that it wasn't in the LCQ. But I mean, I've played it in competitive a few times. I DM on it sometimes, but I don't know. I think the map's interesting. It's a cool concept. I don't think anyone's ever tried it before, but I think it's not pushing the limits too far. Like I don't think there's like glaring issues with the map. I mean, obviously maybe when I play against like pro teams there will be some issues, but I think it looks pretty cool. I like the design. I think it's different, and I'm a big fan of change.
Yeah, man. It's funny because there's so many people that say they hate the map, but they literally will hate any single new thing anyway. So it's actually not about the map.
Yeah, it's just I mean, humans don't like change, right? Like for the most part, like people don't like when they're like just change in general. For the most part, it's pretty it's uncomfortable. I guess is like the right way to describe how I describe it. People don't like being uncomfortable, and then when you put them in a new environment, they're going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that speaks also to the kind of player this game is suited for, because constantly there's going to be changes. So you have to be able to kind of be that kind of player as opposed to, and this is interesting actually, because as a quick side thought, I always saw this pattern and whereby you have the innovators, people that might not necessarily on average have as good mechanics as like the best mechanical players, but most of the time the best mechanical players will be the players that are not the innovators, and they'll have to follow the innovators, and so eventually they take over if there aren't then again changes at some point. So it feels like this actually benefits people that can think better.
I think there's a good balance between this game. Like I think you could definitely have a career not being like the most insane mechanical player in the world, which I think is pretty important for the game's development, because I think the metas will be like ever shifting, and I think having people that want to like develop or like develop metas, I guess is probably the right word. Like I think the metas will be pretty apparent if you like look at like the nerfs and stuff, but I think being able to do your own thing is pretty important, and like maybe someone else can't get as much value out of an agent, but like you can. Like I think a good example would be like it's KO with 100 Thieves at the Berlin qualifier, right? Like no one thought it would work, but they ended up qualifying with it. I mean, their comps were kind of funny, but they made it work, and I think that's more important than just playing like the cookie cutter comps.
Yeah, I'm definitely with that. I think it's one of the things about the game that actually makes it just really enjoyable, actually, because there's always a new story. And in fact, actually, we used to say this in CS. It'd be great to have a tournament where teams knew who they were going to play well ahead of time, because we were kind of looking for the tactical, the strategic innovations that will be possible only when you're in a situation where you can strictly prepare. Yeah. Just to spice it up, because as you said, otherwise it really is kind of like, sometimes I use the comparison. It's not a super great comparison, I guess, but hopefully you can follow it. It's like tournament poker is considered like MTTs and so on are considered to be kind of solved, and like the ROI is like a very small percentage, because there's just like less ways to outplay everybody else, because it's just about, there's obviously more luck involved here, but it's more about just making the correct choices, because you're actually limited, as opposed to cash games where there's loads of opportunities at all times to outplay your opponent, loads more data on opponents, and a lot more flexibility in general. So it's interesting that that's kind of how CS is, because you can kind of track the game in its various eras by teams that kind of put the big pieces together, and then you eventually get to the final version of that, which is Astralis, where they've actually put literally everything together, just the strategic, the tactical, the mechanical, the synergy within the team, just understanding how to like innovate new metas time and again by themselves, like also the resiliency to like win big tournaments for extended periods of time, like
3 years or whatever. Yeah, it was the most impressive thing that I've seen in esports, like consistent, like dominance at that levels. I don't know if it's been done in other games, to be honest. Like obviously they weren't the number one team in the world the entire time, but for a large majority of like every year they were the number one team.
Yeah, it's uncanny. I'm trying to think too. I can only think of maybe maybe in Brood War or something like that.
Maybe T1 or something in like League. I don't know. I've never followed League deck, but I don't think like
same.
I think League might be like Faker's teams and stuff, like SKT or T1 or whatever. It could be some like Samsung Blue, Samsung White, but I don't remember if they ever had like continued success. Like complete like near the level of Astralis, like where it was like 3 years roughly where they were pretty much the best team in the world the entire time. Like maybe there was like a few months where they weren't, like the Liquid Summer or the Liquid Run where they won the Grand Slam maybe, but then even Astralis went back like after that and took the number one team in the world back. So I think it's impressive, and I don't think people understand how difficult that is to do.
Oh man, and it's the thing too. It's just like the game. This is like really at the peak. I mean, Counter-Strike has always been very competitive, but like especially during their era, it's so competitive. And I would love to just be able to talk to like all of those guys about just various elements of them achieving those things, because, as you say, it's so special what they did, and it will probably not be repeated very often over the next like decades. Like
I'd be very
crazy.
Surprised something like that happened again. I mean, obviously it could. Like, it's definitely possible. It's just not likely.
Do you think that Valorant, because the meta, I mean, we can talk about it as a pro, like the meta shifting a lot, and it's great for viewership. Yeah. It's great for many different elements of Valorant as an esport. But do you think there's elements of that will increase the variance in the game that actually makes it so that maybe it'll be too hard to have like a definitively like a best team because the game will be changing too much? Or do you think that's like a cop-out type of answer?
I think meta shifts in MOBA games are a lot more apparent or important, I guess would probably be the right word, than in FPS games. Like, obviously, abilities matter. Like, you can win rounds with abilities solely, but I think people don't... like, they underestimate how important still being able to, like, kill people is. Like, at the end of the day, you can play obviously like the Jet and Reyna are like the two like odd agents where you can play like these insanely like incredibly like weird off angles and stuff. But like for the most part, you can still win the game, like win games by yourself, like just by hitting your shots. Which I think I mean I've never followed MOBAs too closely, but I don't think it's possible for like individuals to win their team games very frequently. Like maybe it is possible, but I don't think it's as consistent as like an FPS player. Like if you have a player like Tens, Cena, Ye, like those players for example, or like go back to Counter-Strike, like Device, Simple, Zywoo, like all of them, like they can consistently just win you rounds like that you shouldn't be able to win, where I don't think there's something like that in MOBAs. So maybe meta shifts are more distinct. Like I definitely think meta shifts are going to happen in Valorant, they're going to continue to happen, but I do see a world where it's possible that a team could have like a longer run than what people think is possible, like due to meta shifts.
Yeah, I think I agree with you totally. Actually, I think there's a lot of assumptions that are always going to be assumptions until proven one way or the other. And I think we're in like such new territory that pretty much everything still remains an assumption about the future of this game in that sense. Because also like if we get there's more new maps, there's more new agents, we get maybe agent pick bans and stuff like this, like it kind of completely changed.
There's a lot of variables that go into it, yeah. But I do think that the like the meta shifts in a MOBA are definitely like I guess like tank top laners versus like a damage top laners in League would be like a good example. Like someone that's really strong at like the tank top laner role isn't going to be as good at the like the damage dealing top. So it's like that's like a huge difference in like playstyle versus like in Valorant. I don't think it's like as or in FPS games. I don't think it's as like clear cut as that.
Yeah, and there's actually like a lot more points and questions I want to talk about on like some of these areas, but I feel like we could just go in the weeds for a long time. So I'm gonna try to like one thing I wanted to ask you for sure is that, you know, when you're playing, when you know Vanity's on the server and you're competing, like what are the things that you like love the most about that experience? Like what do you enjoy and get the, you know, the biggest fulfillment and kicks out of when you're competing or playing as a professional player?
I don't know. Like Iceland was so sick because you could see like the other team standing up. I don't think that was never a thing in Counter Strike because you played like side to side or you were playing in like booths. I think that was definitely like the most fun I've ever had. Just playing, like seeing how much energy like everyone had in the tournament. But I think like the most fulfilling thing for me is in IGL is just like like feeling like you can't make a wrong decision. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but like the flow state, I guess, is how I would describe it. That's definitely like the peak. Like even if I'm killing everything, as long as I'm making the right like calls and like decisions, I'm more than happy.
So one thing about that, which I think is really cool, is like the rock paper scissors type of thing when you're calling, and like this is one element of, let's say, defaulting that sometimes I like try to talk about it on a cast, but it's kind of difficult to really go in depth on it. But this sense, I think, as to what you're saying, where you show something, so now what you've done is you've now either conditioned or suggested that thing may happen again. So the rock paper scissors of that and how another team might want to call against it. I think that's so fascinating. Is there any ways you think that you can explicitly get better at something like that? Like obviously not literally playing rock paper scissors as a practice, but just
I think I just think that's one of the things that does come down to experience. And I think more so it's about knowing the people you're playing versus like just like having the raw experience, because I think people's play styles tend to be pretty similar regardless of like the role and the agent. Like if you have an aggressive player, they're going to be aggressive regardless of if they're playing Killjoy, Cypher, Jet. If you have like a passive player, it doesn't matter what they're playing, they're going to be pretty passive. And I think it's pretty like people are pretty habitual. I mean, this is the same thing we talked about earlier. It's like it's a lot harder for people to break habits than they think. So it's like you can kind of read into that the more that you play against like a certain like type of player. And I think that's like the main thing that comes with experience. It's not even like just like the playing. It's like playing against like certain players and like understanding how they think.
Yeah, it's, you know, one of the first times I sort of came across this in CS when talking to a player was actually talking to devilwalk. And actually there's another cool devilwalk quote. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that he took it from somewhere else because it's kind of like a general thing, but I learned it from him. So I'm always going to do the shout out there. But first thing was that I remember him talking about leading Fnatic, and it was against NIP. And he was just telling me how, like, and this is obviously like a long time ago. And he was telling me how, like, whenever on Dust 2, whenever you got like a pick as like on like one of two positions or two positions on, you know, as a T play, like killing, you get a pick on the CTs. He said, NIP will always respond like this or this. And it's like, he just gave the super easy examples of how he could know. And if you look at the game, it's like, yeah, they actually did habitually respond to losing a player in these certain spots the same way every time.
It's people don't understand how like habitual they are. Like, bad habits don't apply to me. It's like, okay, I guess you're one of the few people on this earth. But it's I think it's pretty important like that people like understanding like your opposition is really important. Not so much like the counter stratting. Like I think counter stratting is kind of inconsistent, but I think it's like if you get like kills on like certain people or like you're in like a certain number situation, people like to play it the same way a lot of the time. And I think it's undervalued. Like that's like something that people don't look at enough.
Yeah, and there's almost like there's a lot more variables in this game that are explicit than in CS, and I love that actually in the sense that it kind of allows us to be more directed in like players have like you say, I think the example would be, like you said, if a team, the first player that they lose on the defense is like a smoke, their only smoke
Yeah,
player, for
I think
example,
I think like the worst map to lose like your smoke agent is like Breeze. If you lose your Viper on Breeze, the round is interesting. It's a lot more like RNG. I guess RNG. It's just you have to play a lot differently than you would if you have like a Viper like alive because the wall cuts off so much vision on the map.
right?
I think it's a lot easier to deal without smokes on most of the other maps. Like it's still annoying for sure. Like it's probably like the least ideal agent to lose, but on Breeze, like losing a Viper early is pretty painful for the attackers.
And it's like it's so cool that because of the defined utility and role of each agent, that even though, as you said, it's not like let's say Overwatch or like a MOBA where you're in a role and you have a specific movement,
Yeah,
you have specific
like
health, you have a specific gun.
Like the DPS dice in Overwatch, and like I've played that game like the first season, but I don't think you do as much damage on the other like classes.
Yeah.
So it's like the DPS is the main damage dealer, so like you don't have to worry about dying nearly as quickly when you take down that person.
Yeah, exactly. And so that creates a dynamic where it's like there are still like enough unknowns, and there's still like enough options, but it narrows the options down enough in a way we can all actually kind of follow, and you can kind of tell a story around it. And that's something I think is super cool about this game. But to quickly kind of go back to the like what a default does, or conditioning or habituation, I can do the kind of devilwalk quote, which was he told me, he's like, I think I was watching a match with him or something in a green room or something. I forget, something like that. And I remember it. There was like a guy in Mirage. It's like a post plant situation or something. And there was a T that was defending, well, one of the T's that was left alive defending the bomb. It's planted on A for those familiar with this map listening. Mirage, I guess if you've seen CS, you've probably seen Mirage. And the guy I basically just made sound, and he didn't poke out or anything like that. He just made sound every so often. And Devilwalk turned to me and he just said, he looked at me like, the threat is greater than the action. And it's like so just, and what he means by that is the suggestion that you might push is actually more damaging than if you tried to push and take that gunfight, because it makes those players constantly have to like look back at that spot and have to pause. They have to worry about it. And all that time you're wasting time, you're giving your teammates more time. Like there's just so many benefits to just suggesting you might do something, which goes back to the defaulting and the conditioning. And like we've shown that we might rush at this time. So now the other team has to think about that thing and has to maybe prep it. So like when we're going back to the calling situation, do you ever like think about calling in this fashion as to like, okay, if I'm going to show certain things at the beginning of my attacking rounds, I now know the kind of responses that the other team should be doing because they're expecting certain timings. Okay. Yeah.
I definitely think that's something that's pretty important. I think, at least the way that I like to IGL, I think that's like conditioning is really important. I think in having a consistency within your play, because I think when you rely, because I think like the biggest flaw that I had in my like early IGLing career was I just kind of like to rush, not rush, but like pop, like do like weird strats. But I think like understanding how to default and understanding like conditioning is the thing that's elevated me to compete at a higher level than prior.
Yeah, it actually raises a question for me because as someone who would watch a lot of CS, casting is so much, doing a lot of analysis on the game, and I see the same exact thing in Valorant too, because both games you can run a default and it's effectively the same purposes that you're running it and the same idea. I always was very surprised in CS, as in Valorant, when a team who wins the attacking pistol doesn't start setting up their defaults. And this is just like as a general approach, not like against a team that they've played a bunch of times and super elite, because obviously those are always matchups that are
those
quite
are always
specific.
That's just people change a lot about like when you play like a team multiple times.
But like the general approach, though,
always rough to play. Like I agree with that.
And like I was always surprised they wouldn't just default and try to set the conditioning straight away.
Even if like the opposition has like pistols, like they're still gonna like listen and hear what you're doing, which in like turn mentally like prepares them for what you're gonna do. But that's like leads into the conditioning aspect. Like even though like maybe they're not taking the round super seriously, they don't think they can win because they have like classics or Glocks and Counter Strike. But it's like it's the purpose of like the mental conditioning. Like even if they're aware of it's an anti-eco or something, they're still gonna like pick up on the things that you're doing and then read into them.
Yeah, and that's like another thing too about like anti-eco is that, I know people are not thinking about it too much in matchmaking and stuff, but like at the top level too, really definitely need to not allow the other team to get who is on the eco to really get a read on how you run your anti-ecos. Because even if you run like a quote unquote like optimized one, if it's not optimized that the other team knows precisely what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's because some teams will go for more of like a gamble approach as well with how they will call or kind of execute their attacking rounds. Where the issue here is that they're not necessarily setting any conditioning if they're just doing repeated like big contacts or pops as you were describing before. And I feel like that can work really well, but I think like again, I haven't done this. But
it's
okay, yeah.
Like I think on Singularity, which was like my first. I mean, we weren't pro, but like we were competing against pro teams. Like we would usually beat like a team on like the first map and then lose the next two because they kind of figure out how we played, which was just like we would just group and then but we would group and like hit a side together. We would gamble a lot on like CT side, but then like towards like the other parts of the map or the other two maps in the best of three, they would like realize, okay, if we just chill out and wait and let them do what they're gonna do, like they're pretty readable, and then we would just like lose the next two maps because of that. Because like I don't think we completely like understood like the intricacies of like a tactical FPS at that point. It was more so, all right, so we can win some maps, but why does it stop working after like we play like a team multiple times? And I don't think that was something I realized until probably like Chaos or something.
Yeah, it's actually pretty amazing as well because like it's the defaulting thing again. It comes back as like not just conditioning the other team, but for your team, like finding out how the other team is actually filling out the map and having more information, which you can then kind of like control outcomes a lot more and predict things a lot more. And you can get into mid rounds where you can actually like use map control space on the map to outplay your opponent. And suddenly like it's like a different game you're playing. This is the thing with FaZe, like because FaZe could run around the stingers during that kind of meta. Like that was very much, you could see that they were approaching it with this style of just like fast pops and just like the Icebox was just out as well. So there's just scale A's. It was mid round didn't exist.
And then on defense, they would just rain of flash pipes every round and just fight the two duelists. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a hard way to consistently win. Like it'll catch people off like once or twice, but like after that, it's like they're really, really mechanically skilled. Like they're probably one of the most mechanically skilled teams in Valorant. But I think it's people kind of expect it, so it's not as good as it once was when it caught people off.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad we got through that meta because that was a rough one.
It was interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. It's crazy too because there's lots of things like in this game that I'm sure people aren't going to figure out are like really good that just will exist for a while. Like the extreme example of the Krieg in Counter-Strike where it was insane for like years. No one figured it out.
That one blew my mind. I remember there was like a player in an A named J Chance, and everyone thought he was like the biggest like noob because he used the Krieg, but he was just years ahead of us.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's so crazy. I mean, that just like that to me is like such a great example of just how the mind of the average player works. Like we all follow each other. We follow the trends. Yeah.
Versus like trying to innovate yourself. Yeah.
And if you do something that's like not expected,
I remember. I think Shroud used to buy the AUG before it got like the insane buff. Because I mean, obviously Shroud wasn't a pro when like the AUG got like the price reduction, but he was still buying it, and he said he stopped buying it. I could be wrong. I could be misremembering, but I think he said he stopped buying it because of like what people were saying.
Yeah,
it's the real thing. Another one who used to buy the AUG. It's like social pressure. I mean, obviously it's just like Twitch chat and stuff, but it's also like maybe if all of these people are saying it and none of the other competitors are using it, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's like a you want to follow who is doing the best instead of like trying to innovate your own. Which I mean, it makes sense, right? Like it completely makes sense, but it's hard to want to step out of like the box, I guess. Like think outside of the box.
I remember like looking on certain shows, like James would often pull up like stats. We had like stat sheets we'd look at just because we were just wanted to learn all the numbers on like all the weapons and stuff. And I remember like looking at the Krieg stats, and he looked at the Krieg stats and it's like, we know it's like insane. It's like, but like there's like this hypnosis because I wasn't convinced because no one was using it. So I'm like, I'm in this like state of hypnosis where it's like, we aren't using it. So
it was even more accurate than like the op. It's insane. It's like no one was using it, but the gun had a better first bullet accuracy than the op or something like that. It was just unreal. And then there was even still like pro players who just like who just like refused to use it, even like they never used it the entire time.
Nico. Oh my god. I would never understand that at the top level. Like,
Yeah, it's odd. It's like these people have like too high of morals to use a weapon in a video game. So that their job is to be the best that they can.
yeah, no, not breaking any rules. Everyone else is using it.
Yeah,
It's not even extreme in any sense. It's like it's literally just another gun that's a bit better.
Yeah, it's odd.
It's super weird.
It's like when the frenzy was meta in Valorant, like frenzy armor pistol on meta or on pistol round. People were like morally above buying the frenzy with armor, even though it was like the best option, like for performance.
Yeah,
It was It's the same thing with. I think it's pretty similar in that regard. It's like people don't want to like the Bucky was another one. Like obviously, I don't think the Bucky was nearly as broken as the Krieg, but people just wouldn't use it because it's broken. It's like, dude, this is your job, man. Use whatever the best is possible. It's like saying you're not going to play Astra because she's too easy or she's too strong.
yeah.
Oh, Jet. Yeah, it's odd. It's like so you don't use the Bucky, but you're gonna play like Jet. Okay, fair enough. Your morals aren't too high to play the agent that can dash away in a tactical FPS, but a shotgun crosses the line.
It's so weird too because like if you follow like the logic like a step further of like, okay, you got this really strong thing in the game, people like take this moral high ground, but it's like everyone has access to it, so like the game's really complicated. You can use that thing and execute it better. It's like no one cares about the person that came up with the idea to do an iPhone. It's like it's Apple and Steve Jobs who made the iPhone and executed on it that people will remember, and it's going to be so it's about the execution. It's got nothing to do with anything else.
I've always thought it was odd when people were like that because I think me, my teammate, and Elige were like when the SG first got reduced price, we were like the only 3 people in NA who were actually buying it. Like still until like I think people started buying it around like April of 2019 is when it became super like common in the meta. But like prior to that, it was like there was probably like 20 people in North America who were using it. Like there would be like a few people that would switch like per week, but they said like, I think the AK is better. And it's like, dude, this thing does everything the AK does, but it has a scope and it shoots faster.
Yeah.
It's just insane. Like people are like, I like the AK, but it's like, okay, I mean, use what you want, but
yeah, I know that like so like on Immortal Minds, like when we were running that show, like one of the things we I remember like trying to sell Sean on the Stinger, but he wouldn't believe me. But I think Mike's was on board with the Stinger being really nuts back then. We were pretty bullish on Viper being theoretically insane, but just like the way that her kit was used it was pretty awful. But but at the moment Mike is really bullish on the Marshall. He thinks that it's like basically like it's like 100 more credits than a sheriff, has a scope, can one shot at any distance. Like the only thing is that people aren't adopting it probably because it's like it's like the Scout in CS. The Scout is super good, but you have to learn specifically how to use it because you move at a different speed. So the mechanics are a bit different with a Scout. So people end up making mistakes with it. But will the Marshall? Do you think the Marshall could be the next big thing? Because it's.
I think it's too much. I think it's literally like the same thing as like the Scout and Counter-Strike. I think it's just like it's really strong, but you need to have like good players with the gun. And I don't think it's a gun that fits like everyone's play styles. And I think it does kind of like even though it's like incredibly accurate, like no scoping, it's not like a comfortable no scope because like there still is inaccuracy compared to like a Sheriff or like a Spectre or like Stinger or something. I think it's really strong for sure. I don't think it's bought enough, but I don't think it's like game breaking or like I don't think it's as like broken as the Bucky was. No.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I also like it's much easier to mitigate pretty much anything because of the abilities. Like in CS, there's like somewhat of a limitation for like specifically neutralizing certain strategies. But in this game, you have if you really want to like shut down stuff, you really can. I feel like so. Yeah, but I wonder what that. I feel like there will probably be a Krieg moment at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
But I wonder what it will be. But
I think the Odin is broken.
The Odin. Why is that?
Yeah, I don't know, dude. You can just shoot through everything. Like if I was a Silva player, I would only use the Odin.
It is pretty good.
I think there's a few. I think there's a few maps that it's like. I think Bind and Ascent, it's really really strong on. Haven, it's not as strong, but it still has pretty like good use. But I think Bind and Ascent, it's like really really strong, and I'm surprised more people don't use it. Yeah, because you can shoot through a lot of walls that I don't think people like completely. Like you can completely spam U-Haul on Bind, but people don't like use it for that. Obviously, it's not as like versatile as like the Phantom and stuff. So like Phantom and Vandal and all of that. So it makes sense why they don't use it, but I think it should be used more than it is.
So I can bring up a quick point about that too, which I think is something I learned in CS as well. Like when I long time ago. Like in CS, like one of the things that people would do to deal with T defaults as a CT is you would like work your AWPers on like the extremities, because you get to often get it exactly. You get it one on one with an AWP, so you probably have a weapon advantage most likely.
Yeah,
and then you
most of the time.
Yeah, so it's like it's a really great thing to do. So if a team knows that you as a CTs have the AWPs, they will be less likely to select some of those approaches to the rounds, or they'll obviously try to explicitly attack that thing. But generally speaking, there's this idea that if you know something is there, like if most of your players have a rifle, but there is angles that they would have to either flash or otherwise just dry walk into, they're not going to be taking those moves. So just like knowing that an AWP is on the server changes how a team will actually move around the map. And it sounds kind of obvious to say it, but when you go into like specific details, like the Odin thing, for example, spamming it for U-Haul, if you do that like enough times, you're going to be conditioning your opponents like to not play that position. They'll have to adapt and play other positions. So
I think it's like, maybe it's not as like, I think it's really strong, but I don't think it's like meta breaking or game breaking. I don't think there's enough weapons in this game for any of them to be like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming there's not going to be anything added to this game like gun wise ever. Maybe there is, but I'd be surprised. But like I don't think
the revolver.
Like, yeah, but I think like the Stinger and the Bucky were like the biggest like meta breaking guns, but even those weren't like that much. Like they weren't like, I don't think they were comparable to the Krieg in any like capacity.
I know people will be raging if I don't ask you about the Judge, because you haven't mentioned the Judge as being OP.
Judge is the best gun in Valorant.
All right,
I've been saving it for LAN. I haven't used it in a while. When I use this gun in scrims, it sucks, but when I buy it in like matches, it's like the best gun. I don't understand it.
Oh, actually, that reminds me. So you played on LAN, obviously. The first proper LAN in Valorant and in Iceland. How did it feel to play on LAN? Because online in CS, like there's certain peaks that you can't really take in the same way. They're not as good online.
I'm not the right person to ask about this because I really don't feel a difference. Everyone says I'm weird, but I don't know. It's like the way I play, I don't really feel like a difference. Like I've never peaked differently online. I've never peaked differently on LAN. Like opping is easier on LAN. In CS, I used to op a lot on LAN, but in this game, no. It's only been one LAN, obviously, but I've never noticed like a really big difference. And I played on 70 ping most of my CS career.
Wow.
I think like the biggest difference is like the energy levels. I think that is like the biggest difference in like everything. It's like people are so much more invested into LAN matches than they are like a random online match. Like at least for me, that's like the biggest thing. It's like the ping, whatever. Like it sucks, but like it's not like you having like high ping isn't like the reason you lose a lot of aim duels. Like yeah, you'll lose some, but you're not gonna like go like triple negative on a map because you have 60 ping. It's just that's just not how it works.
Yeah.
Also like if you're playing on like high ping consistently, you learn to play around the ping. If you're not like just dumb, I guess.
Yeah.
Like if you play on 60 ping, you probably shouldn't be holding angles against someone that has 5 ping. But it's like these people don't like there's like peekers advantage and stuff like that. It's like it still works on LAN. You can still peek on LAN. Like the mechanics of the game don't really change that much. Like yeah, it's probably a little easier to hold angles on LAN, but I think more so like the reason LAN is so much different is like the energy levels that every team has. More so than like the ping. Like obviously the ping is nice, but I think the energy levels are just way, way different online versus online matches.
Yeah, and I love that point about the ping as well, because I remember like in the old days, I used to like train back in the days when I was dueling in Quake 3. I'd actually play on North American servers from the UK to train decision making, because I wouldn't be able to rely on aim as much. So I'd be like forced into playing a different style, which is really educational to do that. And I had some weapons I wouldn't be able to use in nearly the same way. So you have to like learn to select different options and think ahead more.
I definitely think like it's definitely different. Like I'm not saying the game isn't different, but it's like people exaggerate how much different the mechanics of the game are because they just try harder on LAN. Like if you watch like a team's like comms videos online versus LAN, like a Liquid and like CS or something, for example, it's like the energy levels are just completely different. And I think that's like the biggest difference. It's not like the game.
Yeah, and with that actually, comes its own challenges too, because obviously the energy levels, like everything is magnified effectively. So like the same thing goes for any of the negative things. Like you get a lot of like anxiety when you're playing, possibly if you're experiencing like a level of pressure that you're struggling to handle. Like, you know, kind of going into those experiences for you with LAN, like how has that been managing, you know, like performing your best whilst you're experiencing things that are certainly like getting in the way that are unique to LAN?
I don't think I've ever had like negative experiences with anxiety, because I think like the anxiety that I get when I play matches is not like, I'm relatively good at like controlling it, I guess. Like, yeah, it's there, but it's like you kind of just, I think it's like the excitement of just like being able to do it, what like we do. Like, dude, like I get to travel the world playing video games. Like, of course, me being able to compete on a stage is gonna make me anxious, but it's like trying not to let it control you, and I think I'm pretty good at it. I try not to focus on it too much. Like, I think for the most part, like the nerves are there for like the first like 3 or 4 rounds, and then they typically go away. For me, at least. I don't think it's the same for everyone, but like for me, for the most part, I'd say like the first 3 or 4 rounds of a map, of like a best of 3 or whatever, is like the farthest they get.
It's kind of interesting because I think there's like, I think you touched on the kind of two modes your brain kind of gets into in a sense, and you're trying to like get to that second one where it's like you're just executing and focusing on each job as it presents itself, and just doing what you've practiced, basically just doing the routine. And then there's the other bit, which is like the anticipation where you are thinking about like, holy shit, I'm doing this for a living, and if I have a bad performance, like, you know, that's gonna, I've let my team down, or my other players, or, you know, just I won't live up to what I want to live up to, and we have to get this result, or like, you know, just all these other thoughts have time to kind of build.
I think something that I'm good at, that I feel like a lot of people put way too much pressure on themselves, which I don't really do as much. Like, I think a lot of teams and like players tend to like put so much pressure on themselves, and it causes them to like feel the anxiety a lot more, whereas I've never really done that to myself. I think that's like a decent point that or like a decent like thing that I've kind of learned to like do.
How do you feel like you've
over the years?
Oh, sorry, I got a little internet moment there. What were you saying?
I just think I think a lot of people put too much pressure on themselves. I think that's like the biggest reason that sometimes it happens online, is like they go in expecting, like, even as like an underdog. I guess I've never been like a favorite going into a tournament for the most part, like maybe a few, but it's like they just put so much pressure on themselves when you're not like players like that have competed at like such a high level. Like, I think like a good example would be Liquid in Iceland. These guys were saying they're like the best team in Europe, whatever. Like, obviously it's all hype and stuff, but it's like they said to our coach like they think they should easily 2-0 us, and then they lost to a stand-in. Obviously, like, I don't like, they put so much pressure on themselves, and the Liquid that I watched in the VODs wasn't the same Liquid that I played, because like the pressure, like, they just, I think when you're putting so much pressure on yourself as like a competitor, when you haven't done it all, is really rough, and I think it's pretty hard for people to handle.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting point, because there's like a mixture of things, right? It's like partly it's the individual's like context and sort of who they are as a person. Like, there's lots of like people that more.
Like, there's definitely, I think there's a lot of variables that go into it, but I think it's just like not like just living in the moment, I guess, which is difficult, but it's like not allowing yourself to, like, when you haven't done like accomplished a lot, I think it's really bad to put the pressure on yourself that you're like the best team in your region or whatever, because it's just like setting yourself up for failure, in like my opinion, at least.
It also doesn't mean anything, right? Because it's like,
it's like, if you haven't done anything, and like, if you haven't actually like won things and done anything, no one cares that you're saying you're the best team in the region. You're just adding pressure to yourself to prove it.
Yeah, like, exactly.
And a lot of people do not have like the mental capacity to like do it.
Yeah,
it's really hard. Like, I don't think there's very many people like in the earth that do that, like compete for a living, that have that like mental capacity. Like, obviously there's gonna be like the anomalies, like ZywOo. Like, he didn't even play like professionally at all, and then goes to LAN and just dominates. I just think that guy's something else, man.
He is not human. He is actually not.
But it's just like, I think people just put so much pressure on themselves, and that's like the biggest like thing for me. It's like I try not to like ever like I have expectations, right? Like I'm not going in like just expecting to lose, but it's like I'm not gonna like go in saying, oh, we're gonna win this tournament, we're the best team in North America. It's like, dude, no, we have to prove that before you can say anything.
Yeah, totally. I think it's really easy, especially if, again, as you say, like if you don't have experience, you can get really caught up in the moment. And this is like, oh my god, maybe it's like the first or second or third or even the fifth land that I've played, and it's like it feels like such a momentous moment in the career, because it kind of is. It's like it's the start of your career.
It's definitely a really big moment, but it's like someone like saying that, like who'd be like a good example, like someone on extra solving Counter-Strike, like probably not Marky, like JT or Sonic or something. They've probably been at like 10 international lands versus Elige. It's like Elige has competed at 10 times the amount of events as you. Yeah. He has like the right, I don't know like the way to describe it, but like it sounds a lot better coming from someone who's competed at that level for such a long time at a high level versus people who haven't done it nearly as frequently, because like they know what it takes to get there versus you're just kind of like just guessing, I guess. I don't know how to like describe it perfectly, but I think that's like the way that I like envision it in my head.
Yeah, it goes back to the, if we go back to the title of the book, what was it? It's like the score
takes care of itself.
The score takes care. Yeah, it's like this idea. This is like a really difficult thing, I think, to wrap your head around sometimes. Is that there's, as a competitor, there's like obviously like a championship is important, but at the same time, no one moment is important. No one data set is important. It's actually like it's like going back to poker again. It's like the sample size. Like, what does your sample size actually tell you? In terms of your averages. Yeah, because you can't be that guy that's like, I'm gonna win this tournament. I mean, you can, but you're
just gonna look stupid when you lose. It's like you're just adding so much pressure to yourself. It's like it's so much different if Elige goes into a tournament saying, "Oh, I'm gonna win," versus like if like OC goes into a tournament and says, "Oh, I'm gonna win." Yeah. It's like there's not, guys. Let's just be realistic.
Yeah, no.
The goal here is to compete and do as good as we can. If we win, that's good. If not, it's not the end of the world. But then like these people like get into like high pressure situations and they crumble because they're putting so much like pressure on themselves.
It's yeah, I love that we have Elige because he's such a great example of just like what if you do everything right, like what can start to happen. And what's really cool is I spoke to him briefly, just a very brief interview over the weekend, and I've obviously like did a podcast with him and sort of like discovered like his methodology, and I actually recently released a second interview with his sports psychologist where he gets his like all of his like mental stuff comes from Jared Tendler's approaches basically. Yeah. So I have a pretty good understanding of how he thinks and does things. And he was saying like in this small interview over the weekend, he's like, when I go into warm up within about 15 minutes, I know if it's going to be an A game day or like a B game, or like he like knows precisely where he is after like 15 minutes on how his entire game, how he will perform, on how he will perform throughout the entire day based on that first 15 minutes of play. Yeah. He has the sensitivity, like the awareness, he has worked out a system that's so defined that he knows that based on what he sees.
And then he can play around like in the match. Like if he's not on his like I remember listening to this, I think it was with you.
Yeah.
It's like if he's not on his A game, he's not going to take the fights that he would take if he's on his A game. He's going to play like more like thoughtful, I guess, like more well thought out rounds versus just taking aim duels because he's going to win them. And I think that's pretty important. I don't think that a lot of people have that capabilities.
Yeah, he's like he's studied every part of his game, so it doesn't matter like where he is in this range of his performance. He knows what it is.
He knows how to get a performance out of himself.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, again, I love that he exists as an example because he kind of, there is some proof there. He's just one guy, but there is some proof there that these things work. Like these things make sense. It works.
Yeah.
It's so he's a great example to follow in terms of his approach to how to be a professional. And I actually have a funny, unless you have another thought on that, I have a question for you. No. I was going to say, like, earlier in the interview, you mentioned how, it can be really easy. It can be easy to be kind of lazy and not to participate enough as a competitor, as a professional, put the time in, put the work in, and so on, and be disciplined out of the game as you are in the game. It's, we have like all these like new games releasing as well. Like, being someone that plays a video game professionally, they usually, I found that gamers will have, like pro gamers will have like at least like one side game that they play just to relax or unwind and so on.
Yeah.
We recently had like New World release by Amazon Games, like an MMO. Is that, are you into all of this? What's your jam? What do you do?
No. I don't play anything else really. Like I think the only game every like few months I'll play World of Warcraft for like a week. I play TFT sometimes, but I don't really like when I'm not on my computer or when I'm on my computer. It's usually just Valorant for the most part. Like I don't like to unwind by playing other games usually.
That I feel like that's rarer for sure. I've definitely come across a lot of players like you, but it is definitely a
I
rarer.
don't know. I agree. I definitely think it's not common. I think a lot of people like to like just play other games, but I like to just not be on my computer because like I'm on my computer probably like 8 to 12 hours a day on practice days. So usually I try not to touch my computer on Saturday. I mean, I'll probably be on it a little bit, but not nearly as much as I would be on like a normal day.
So what do you do then to kind of like unwind, or like how do you like to spend your time when you're not competing?
I don't know. I just kind of like mentally decompress from everything. I just kind of lay around, maybe watch some Netflix, go for walks. I think the grocery store is my favorite place on planet Earth. I go like every day for some reason. Not sure why. Don't even really buy anything half the time. But yeah,
Which grocery store are you going to, man? Like
HEB. It's the best place on planet Earth.
Right.
But yeah, no. I don't know. I think it's just good to like mentally decompress a lot of the time regarding like spending time away from computer, because I think, at least with me, I think everyone's different for sure, but I think myself, when I spend too much time on my computer, I kind of like go into autopilot during practice and stuff like that, and I think it's not very good, especially with, like the IGL.
Yeah, I definitely like. Again, this is one of the reasons why this super beneficial. You actually take time away from it, because I think what ends up happening. I don't know where I was talking about this recently. I can't remember where or to who, but like there's this idea, like if you want to take the example of like what we know about like training in like the gym or something like that, you know, you have this idea that, you know, strength is like two things. It's like one thing is that it's your central nervous system knowing like what to fire off and then what order. It's like the strength is practice part, like how to do it, like your brain knowing how to do the thing. And then there's like the raw potential in your muscles to actually be able to output the amount of work needed to do that thing. And so you've got these two little things happening, and you know you can actually burn out your CNS. This is like the whole point of like deloading, is that's what it's for. Yeah. So it's like I definitely see that this happens, but I think again this is why you're onto something, is because when you do like also spend more time on the computer playing other things, like your brain is still like going for it. So I do feel like that if that is a thing, as it is in sports, I think it's got to be the same in terms of like like creating mental fog
for sure.
for mechanics.
I definitely think I've definitely noticed that. Like I don't remember I think like the last time I played a game a lot was like World of Warcraft Classic when it first came out back in, I honestly have no clue. Whenever it first came out was like the last time I played like a lot of hours into a game, and I could just feel myself like mental fog just because how much I was on my computer. And I think it's not the best, but I definitely do think it's person to person. Like some people can handle being on their computers a lot more, but I think for me it's not as beneficial, and I think like it's just like I feel like I'm just autopiloting during practice, which isn't the best.
Okay, so if there is a thing that isn't taking walks and just like not being on the computer and sort of like watching Netflix, stuff that you described already, that is something that you do outside of the game that helps you be better in the game, like what would it be? It's not those things.
Gym, I guess I go to the gym. I read. I think I try to read a lot of like books, like for mental, like this sports psych books for the most part. I don't venture too far out of that category. I've read a few books here and there, but I don't know. That's really most of it.
Nice. Well, Vanity, I think we've been on for a while now, about an hour and 40. So I think we initially were kind of scheduled for around an hour or something like that, but I feel like I could talk to you about loads of different topics and could just go forever. But I think it's time to end this one for now. You're going to be at LCQ, obviously, and this will be launching before that so that people can kind of see you before LCQ. And you know, is there anything that you want people to look out for with, you know, for you, like stuff that you'll be doing? Are you doing any content? Like what's going on in the world of Vanity over the next few weeks?
I don't know about content much the next few weeks. I'll probably be practicing really hard for the LCQ. Hopefully we can get the spot in champions. That's the goal. But I mean, maybe it won't happen. I don't know. It's our first tournament as a team for the most part. I mean, we played like an NSG tournament, but this is definitely our first real test.
With that said, actually, we didn't talk about some of the opponents. Who do you think will be the most difficult opponents? And if it's not you guys qualifying, who do you think are the other like top 3 contenders to actually qualify? Because it's pretty stacked this tournament.
Exet, Rise, 100 Thieves probably would be my top 3. I think Exet and Rise are probably the. I don't know actually. I think it's pretty stacked to be honest. Like I think if any team comes in and has like, because it's 6 days or whatever, if you had like a good week, you could definitely qualify. I think it will be like one of the 4 of Exet, Rise, V1, and us. That's who I think, like based off practice and like stuff. But I mean, anything's possible. You can come in, have a good week, like playing wise, and then you can just make it. But yeah, I would be surprised if it's not one of those 4, 5, whatever. I think I said 4 teams.
Well, there we go. It's going to be really fun to watch it, and wish you the best of luck and your team as well. It's going to be really cool seeing like what you guys can do on your first LAN together, and I'll probably see you there. I guess actually, I should be seeing you there. So get some Korean barbecue or something. It's going to be good. All right, thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for your time.